And we're back. The Kraken season might have ended over a month ago, but there's still some Kraken content to cover, and I do appreciate you sticking with me here and waiting it out, as I know this one has been much awaited and anticipated by at least a couple people anyway, but it is the Kraken Awards. The channel Cheap Seats Kraken Awards, that is. Now, there aren't a ton of awards to get to, so this video is likely to be on the quicker end, but we still have plenty more Kraken content. We got player grades, and then, well, lots of 101s, and we'll have the draft in not too long, so even with the Kraken season having been over for a little while, yeah, there's still plenty to get to. So anyway, let's not waste any more time and get right to these awards, starting with the ones that don't require any voting, just counting stats. First up is the Rocket Rashard, the most goals scored by a Kraken player this season, and for the third year in a row, it's Jared McCann running away with it. 29 goals on the season, which is a step back for him from the 40 goals of last season, but still 9 clear of any other Kraken player. Which does kind of say something about the Kraken's issues in actually scoring goals this season, but we already covered that in some depth in the season recap video, so if you're interested in more in that, yeah, that's a separate video that already was out over a week ago now. Anyway, McCann, for the third straight year, all 3 years of the Kraken existence, scoring the most goals on the team, and also taking away the Kraken Art Ross for most points in the season, his 62 leading the team by a much more narrow margin than he's had in the previous 2 seasons, just 3 points ahead of Oliver Bjorkstrand, who did have 59 with a whole bunch of assists. Actually, for that matter, there isn't an award for the most assists, so I guess we could make one up, and Oliver Bjorkstrand with his 39 assists would have won that for the Kraken this season, taking it from Vince Dunn, who I'm pretty sure won it both the previous 2 seasons. I know he did last year, I can't remember for sure about the inaugural season, but I'm pretty sure he had that, and Bjorkstrand also was second to McCann, not only in points, but also was the only other player with 20 goals for the Kraken, so a pretty good year from Bjorkstrand, just a little bit short of McCann for those 2 awards. And that brings us to the awards that actually did require some voting, which was done over on Patreon. I came up with the finalists, and Patreon did the rest. A few of them did turn out to be a bit of runaways, which was the case with this first one. I probably would have had it later on, but it really wasn't even close, and it's not a surprise. It's the Kraken Vezina, with the 3 finalists being the 3 guys that played games for the Kraken this season: Joey Daccord, Philip Grubauer, and playing a couple of games, Chris Driedger, just to have 3 finalists. And the winner was, obviously, Joey Daccord, an absolutely incredible season for Daccord. He also played the most games for the Kraken, playing in 50 games for them with a 19, 18, and 11 record, which isn't necessarily a fantastic record, but attributing wins and losses to goaltenders is about as pointless, if not more so, than it is in baseball when it's attributed to pitchers. It still happens though, so I'll read it off as part of the stat line. But when it comes to the popular stats that matter at least a little bit more to the goaltender specifically, goals against average and save percentage, Joey Daccord set franchise records in both of those, with the lowest goals against average in franchise history by a pretty healthy margin with a 2.46, pretty easily beating out Grubauer's 2.85 from the previous season, and then also set the franchise record with a .916 save percentage, which, once again, easily a franchise record. Grubauer would have gotten second there, and I mean second not just this season, but in the franchise's history. His .899 is the second best save percentage a goaltender has had for the Kraken, and I'm not counting, technically speaking, Driedger's 2 games. He did have a .917, so I guess that's a little bit better, but yeah, 2 games is not enough of a sample size where I'm really going to take that into consideration. Same with Daccord having 2 games last season where he had a 900 save percentage. Again, just not enough of a sample size to really play into franchise records and that kind of stuff. Either way, the 916, a very good season for Daccord, and obviously all of that is highlighted for Daccord with that incredible Winter Classic game, the 35 save shutout, which was not only the highlight of his season, but just the highlight of the Kraken season in general, and honestly, I'd probably go so far as to say the best regular season game in Kraken history. The only ones maybe you could put up there would be the first one, just because it was the first one, the first home game. Again, similar reasons. They lost both of those though, so maybe not quite the same. And then maybe the game where they clinched the playoffs last year. I would still put that Winter Classic easily above the rest though. Up next, we have another award that turned out to be a bit of a runaway. It's the Kraken Norris. The finalists for this one, I had Vince Dunn, Adam Larsson, and Justin Schultz. In the end, though, it was unanimous. Vince Dunn, even in spite of missing a quarter of the season, ends up winning this one, and yeah, he's just the best Kraken defender. Maybe not always in the defensive end. I think if it was purely defensive defender, I'd probably give it to Larson. The first half of the season for Alexiak was great, but his second half of the season, not so much. Anyway, with his 11 goals, 35 assists for 46 points in 59 games, those 35 assists, by the way, being the second most on the team to Bjorkstrand, he continues to establish himself as the best defenseman the Kraken have, and also worth the contract that he signed at the beginning of the season. Which I suppose on top of that, it's nice to see that he, like McCann, didn't just play really well in that contract year, and then as soon as the money is coming in, he lets up a little bit. I mean, sure, his numbers aren't quite as good as last year, but a lot of that just has to do with missing time because of those couple of horrible hits that he took at the end of the season. And also the time that he probably hurt his hand punching Sillinger in Beniers' defense, but I think we can excuse that one. Moving on though, up next we have the last of the awards that really were not terribly tough decisions. In this case with the Calder, the Kraken Rookie of the Year, it's largely because of the not terribly big pool of candidates, in part because I stuck with the actual NHL Calder rules, which means that Joey Daccord is too old to be a Rookie of the Year, even though it was his first full season in the NHL. Though even there, I don't regret that decision, because if I just ignored the NHL rules and put Daccord in, since it was his first full season in the NHL, he clearly would have won it anyway, so it's just nice to have a different face with another award. But anyway, the candidates then, based on NHL rules, were Ty Cartier, Riker Evans, and Shane Wright, which, yeah, with Shane Wright and you could have thrown in Ryan Winterton and some of the other guys that came up, only playing a few games over the course of the season. That's how dry this pool was for the Kraken as far as candidates for Rookie of the Year. And in the end, rightfully so, the winner was Ty Cartier, having played 77 games for the Kraken. He was with the team for the entire season. Riker Evans did get one vote, so obviously his impressive showing coming up halfway through the season and playing through the back half of it with the team was enough to encourage at least one of the patrons to go with him, and he really did play well. But even while it was an impressive start to the career for Riker Evans, Cartier was the deserving winner in my eyes as well. His 11 goals and 9 assists for 20 points in those 77 games is not necessarily what we might have hoped for after his great playoff run, though it really wasn't the role that he was playing on the team to be that goal scorer. He often played in that bottom six as much more of a shutdown physical type of asset for the Kraken, and he definitely provided that physicality. At times, he was clearly the most physical player the Kraken had on the forward end. Really, the only guy that I think over the course of the entire season could even compete for him there would probably be Yanni Gourde, and maybe you throw in Brandon Tanev there, though honestly, Tanev's physical aspect of his game didn't seem to be quite as consistent as Cartier's was over the course of the season. And honestly, we can get more into this in the player grades wrap-up part of the season, that is much more the type of role that I see him playing for the Kraken as long as he's part of the team, really making his home in the NHL, being that bruising, shutdown type of third or fourth line player, and definitely the type of player that you need at least a couple of in your bottom six if you fancy yourself as a team that's going to be making the playoffs consistently and making some deep playoff runs. And that brings us to the most contested of the awards, at least when it came to how close the voting was over on Patreon, the Kraken Selke for the best defensive forward on the team. And part of this is that defensive forward is a much harder thing to quantify and put into stats. It often ends up being the best defensive player that also scores points in the NHL, so it's not even necessarily the guy that's the best defensively. You also have to have some offense there. But for the sake of argument, I went with guys that did play very well in the defensive end as far as forwards are concerned for the Kraken. And the finalists were, once again, Ty Cartier showing up here, as well as Jordan Eberle, Matty Beniers, who even in spite of his offensive issues this season, didn't take a step back defensively. He was pretty good in the defensive end for the vast majority of the season. And then I couldn't really resist throwing in Yanni Gourde, so we do have 4 finalists in this one. I mean, Gourde just feels like he's going to be a mainstay here as one of the finalists. But in the end, the winner was, and it was close between he and Gourde, Jordan Eberle. And again, this is something I'll probably take a little bit more of a deep dive into with Eberle specifically when we get to the Kraken player grades. But he had a fantastic defensive season for the Kraken. It's not necessarily going to show up as much in the stat sheets, but he was always around the net. And as we talked about in the season review video, one of the things the Kraken really did well defensively this season, even more so than years past, was bending but not breaking in their end of the ice. And what I mean by that is that when they did allow teams to get into their end of the ice, they were very good at clearing pucks away from the net, even if they did allow initial shots, not allowing very many rebound chances or second chances around the net, clumping up by the net and making sure that any rebounds that either Decord or Grubauer did allow got swept out to the side without too much trouble, or again, those follow-up shots. And Eberle in particular, I noticed constantly doing that over the course of the season, right around the net and clearing out a lot of those shots. He wasn't necessarily one of the guys that had a save like Bjorkstrand did, or Riker Evans had a couple of them, but he still was always around the net and making it much more difficult for opponents to score. Which I suppose, given the number of times that he got robbed at the other end of the ice, only seems fair that he would return the favor at the Kraken end. And that just then leaves the biggest award of all, and honestly one that I thought would be a lot closer when it came to the voting than it turned out to be. It's the Kraken Hart, the MVP of the Kraken this season. I had the finalists being Jared McCann, obviously is the leading goal and point scorer once again. Vince Dunn, the best defenseman and third in points on the team, even in spite of missing a quarter of the season. Joey Decord for, well, everything that Joey Decord did. And then just because of how the season went, especially at home, for fun I threw in Bowie for making things at least a little bit more entertaining for the home games. Nobody ended up voting for Bowie, thankfully, though, so this did all come down to voting for players, and it once again turned out to be a bit of a runaway, though not unanimous. In the end, the winner was Vince Dunn. He, for me, has been the MVP for the Kraken the last couple of seasons. McCann, I think, was pretty clearly the MVP the first season, but you really saw it, even though Dunn did miss those, well, he only played the 59 games, so missed, again, about a quarter of the season. It was very clear how much the Kraken missed him when Dunn was not on the ice. His absence is a large part of the reason the Kraken went on that 8-game losing streak that effectively killed their season in March. Even though they won the first couple of games after he went down with the first injury, they just were not able to fully recover and certainly had a hard time scoring and generating any kind of offense and getting the puck down the ice consistently without Dunn to start those breakout opportunities. So even aside from the point production that he provided, again, third in points on the team and second in assists, even in significantly fewer games than some of the other players around him on that list, he provides a lot in just starting those plays down the ice in the first place to get the Kraken into the offensive end for those opportunities to even begin. Not to mention what he provides on the power play as well, which, yeah, the power play did not do particularly great without him as the quarterback of that first unit. Though Riker Evans did step in and do a pretty good job, I think, for what it's worth. So then, one more time with the Kraken Awards for this 23-24 season. With the most goals and most points on the team, the Rocket Rashard and Art Ross, it's Jared McCann for the third year running. For the Rookie of the Year this year, it's Ty Cartier. Norris, Defenseman of the Year, Vince Dunn. Vezina clearly going to Joey Decord. The Selke, the most debated one, or at least closest voting, ends up going to Jordan Eberle. And the Hart, the MVP for the Kraken this season, Vince Dunn. And as far as the channel 3 stars based on who I gave the 3 stars to this year for the first time, that also helped out by Patreon when it came to the 3 stars after every game. The most frequent 3 stars for the Kraken were Joey Decord, no surprise, number 1, Oliver Bjorkstrand, number 2, and Jared McCann, number 3. I think all 3 of those make a lot of sense. Vince Dunn only not showing up there because of the number of games that he missed due to injury. Missing that many games makes it a lot harder to show up on the 3 stars for games, so yeah, that plays into why McCann and Bjorkstrand show up rather than Vince Dunn maybe taking McCann's spot there. But with all that being said and wrapping up these 23-24 awards, let me know what you think down in the comment section below, which guys you personally would have picked over the ones that ended up winning, even if it's someone that wasn't even one of the finalists, for example. I'd love to hear that. I'd love to hear about that down in the comment section. And Tech, even if you feel like these awards are pointless after a season like we just had, as far as I'm concerned, it's nice to have a little bit of a distraction from not having to just sit over the next few months on, well, that season that was and continue to watch these playoffs wondering what it would have been like if the Kraken could have made it there. Anyway, until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.